I want to read a couple more things from Howard's article.
Yes.
It's called The Gospel of Matthew, originally written in Hebrew, or was the Gospel of Matthew originally written in Hebrew in 1986. He says, I do not mean to suggest that the Hebrew in Shem-Tov's text is pure 1st century AD Hebrew, for it clearly is not. And we'll see an example later, or very soon, I think, of that, where it has the Greek word or the Latin word Christos. I mean, obviously, that's not Hebrew 1st century. The 1st century text must be linguistically excavated, so to speak. Shem-Tov's Matthew is written in biblical Hebrew with a healthy mixture of Mishnaic Hebrew and later rabbinic vocabulary and idiom. It also reflects changes by medieval Jewish scribes who, among other things, attempted to make it read more like the Greek. Yeah. In other words, as the scribes copied it, they said, wait a minute, verse 17 is missing. And some scribes supplied verse 17, right? Meaning there's some Hebrew Matthew manuscripts that have verse 17 because they said that's missing. Well, according to Howard, it's missing because it wasn't originally in that version. Yeah. Moreover, the primitive layer of Shem-Tov's Matthew, Howard says, is written in an unpolished style and is filled with ungrammatical constructions and Aramaicized forms and idioms. Meaning Aramaic was a predominant language in the 1st century, and even the Jews who spoke Hebrew, it was heavily colored by Aramaic. An analogy would be Tejanos, that is, people of Spanish descent in Texas who speak Spanish. It's heavily, I'm not expert in Spanish, but I'm told their Spanish is not the Spanish they speak in Mexico. It's heavily colored by English because they're surrounded by English speakers. In these characteristics, it resembles many of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments and gives the appearance of belonging to the same time frame. Reading Shem-Tov's Matthew, Howard says, is often like reading one of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Can I bring one thing about this, just for the perspective, from the issue of perspective, is that we have said for years, and we're saying it again, this is not the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew that we believe that Matthew penned. This is a witness.
Absolutely. Say witness.
Let me say it again. A witness that we can use when we look at the English and the Greek and the Hebrew and all of these things together. We can come to what we call, it smells like, there's a taste of the original Hebrew. There's some folks that get frustrated because they say, I can't find this word. It's not in the Tanakh. That's because that particular word, whether it was the Mishnaic Hebrew or, in fact, maybe even some Yiddish a little bit every once in a while.
Yiddish. I'm not aware of any Yiddish.
A couple examples of things that just they're not biblical Hebrew is the point.
I don't think there's any Yiddish in Shem-Tov's Hebrew.
Aramaic. I'm sorry, Aramaic.
Aramaic, and there's Latin words that we'll see, which are obviously glosses.
But these words are not all exactly what was, but we have a witness. So this is why this is so exciting. And this is the first time we've had someone that's looking at all 28 manuscripts that you've been able to scour.
I want to read something else Howard wrote, or I'll explain it. It's a really important point. So he brings the analogy first to Ben Sira, right? And what that means is we know Ben Sira was written around 200 BC, or we believe now, right, that it was true that it was translated from Hebrew. But the one from the year 1000 isn't identical word for word. It's been transmitted, and over that period of transmission, sure, things changed. It's a witness to the original Hebrew that sometimes gets behind some of the problems in the Greek and gives us a better understanding than we'd have from the Greek alone. But you have no choice with studying Ben Sira. The Greek is still the primary text. There's whole sections where the Greek doesn't, there is no Hebrew text. There's only Greek.
That's what's exciting.
Yeah. That's with Ben Sira. So another analogy that Howard, and this is really important because people will say, Nehemia, you're saying that the Matthew is a translation from the Hebrew. Well, yes and no, not exactly. So he brings the analogy of Josephus. Yes. Josephus was a Jew from the Galilee who was a general in the army of the Jewish rebels against the Romans. He was captured by the Romans and then remained a prisoner of the Romans for the rest of his life. And he wrote a book called The Jewish War. You could tell just from the name, he wrote it from the Roman perspective, because from the Jewish perspective, it was the Roman War. So he wrote this book called The Jewish War, and in the introduction, he makes the statement that he has written this in Hebrew. Now, some people say when he says Hebrew, he means Aramaic. That seems rather unlikely to me. And then later, here, let me read it to you because it's that important. Because here we have, so it's Jewish War. It's the first section. He says, whereas the war which the Jews made with the Romans has been the greatest of all those, not only, so basically saying this is the biggest war of his period. This wasn't some minor skirmish for the Romans. It was a major war. And he says everybody else is lying about it. Verse 3, of War, chapter 1, verse 3. I have proposed to myself for the sake of such as live under the government of the Romans to translate those books into the Greek tongue, which I formerly composed into the language of our country and sent to the upper barbarians. And by upper barbarians, he means the Jews living in the Parthian Empire, that is Babylonia, what today is Iraq and Iran, essentially, and then possibly what today is Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
I, Joseph, the son of Matthias, by birth a Hebrew, a priest also, and one who was first fought against the Romans myself, and was forced to be present at what was done afterwards, and the author of this work. So he's telling you, he first wrote it in Hebrew, or he says the language of our country, and then for those who don't know Hebrew, he translated it into Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at the Greek, I'm not a Greek expert to the degree where I can say this, but Greek experts say this, that the Greek sure has a flavor of Hebrew, but it also flows pretty well. It's pretty good in Greek. And what Howard argues and others have said is that it wasn't that he took it and translated it word for word. He essentially rewrote it in Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And they describe this as a first recension, the Hebrew recension, and the Greek recension. And Howard argued that Shem-Tov's Hebrew Matthew was simply the Hebrew recension, of which the Greek recension was written by Matthew as well.
Mm-hmm.
Are you with me on that? That's a
100%.
key point. So we're not saying, oh, well, let's throw away the Greek. It's just a later Greek translation. We're not saying that at all.
Nehemia,
Yes.
we can't throw away the Greek. They made me take hours and hours and
What was your
hours
Greek course
and
called?
hours. First one was suicide Greek. Then I had to take exegesis. And I'm telling you, what I'm telling you is hours of Greek. And what you did in throwing me the curveball, 18 years, say 18 years ago, when you said the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, I will tell you, I confess to the world, the first thing I thought is, he found the original Matthew. Are you kidding me? And over time, I learned that we have a witness. But I'll tell you something, this witness is filled with pearls.